Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Kinane. Coming up, Labor slams Tony Abbott's manufacturing fund as woefully inadequate. The new Freedom Commissioner pushes for a repeal of a key section of the Racial Discrimination Act. And Eddie Obeid faces the prospect of handing back tens of millions of dollars worth of ill-gotten gains. Our panel tonight, News Corp Australia's National Economics Editor, Jessica Irvine, Sydney Morning Herald columnist, Paul Sheehan, and Miriam Lyons from the Centre for Policy Development. And you can join the Prime Minister's Indigenous Advisory Council has warned the federal government against changing a key part of the Racial Discrimination Act. Writing in the Sydney Morning Herald today, Warren Mundine says he's expecting a polarising political debate on Section 18C of the Act. That section makes it unlawful to insult, offend, humiliate or intimidate someone on the basis of race, colour, national or ethnic origin. The Attorney-General George Brandis promised to amend or repeal it after it was used to prosecute columnist Andrew Bolt for publishing deceptive and offensive material about Indigenous people. Mr Mundine says changing the law would send a dangerous signal and be a mistake. But the new Freedom Commissioner, Tim Wilson, says one of his first priorities will be to push for the repeal of Section 18C.
There are currently restrictions in the Racial Discrimination Act which make it essentially illegal to insult, offend, humiliate or people on the basis of group identities. There was a proposal, as I said last year, to extend that to all groups, and I don't come from a groups rights-based perspective, I come from an individual rights-based perspective. We need an open contest of ideas, we need free speech, and the only way to challenge and tackle offensive speech is to have more speech and for people to openly mock and ridicule things that people say that they find offensive.
Paul, who do you think's right on this one, Tim Wilson or Warren Mundine?
I'm very much on Tim Wilson's side. I'd like to see the entire Act dissolved.
So not just 18C, the whole
Just
Act?
get rid of it. And we've got adequate means to deal with the revolting behaviour. I think that you can, in trying to put a curb on the nastiness out there, and anybody who goes on social media knows that nastiness is a growth industry because the means are there. But I'm very leery of group rights over individual rights because it creates these false divisions in society. I actually think that we're a very tolerant country and we don't need a hammer on this nutmeg.
There is a section of the Act, though, 18D, which qualifies 18C. It gives a defence to insulting and offending and humiliating if it's fair comment, if you're accurate with what you're saying. Does that not provide enough of a freedom of speech protection in the Act?
Well, what undid Andrew Bolt was he made factual errors.
He's got his, yeah.
Yeah, right. And I think there's, you're very, very, I'm leery to go into the debate over race in Australia because people go off at the slightest notion. I mean, the whole idea of Aboriginality in Australia, where the majority of people that we call Aboriginal are actually of mixed race, and yet that's a fraught area, and I'd like to see ways in which the fraughtness can be diminished rather than exaggerated by a sort of a fairly intrusive group's right agenda.
Miriam, where do you stand on this one?
Look, I think that anti-vilification laws are incredibly important, and if you think that there's no link between hate speech and hate acts and the prevalence of that, then you're probably quite divorced from the experience of those who actually have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis.
I do.
You deal with hate speech and hate acts.
Every single day I get hate speech directed at me.
I'm glad that there have been no hate acts in your direction, Paul, but in terms of
death threats?
In terms of how the kind of fabric of society holds together, I absolutely believe in free speech, incredibly important, but if we don't have some kind of protection against racial vilification, I think it's very easy to have hatred build upon hatred to the point where the idea of equality, the idea of free speech for the people who are at the receiving end of that, is just not there. It's not a practical reality.
I'm not sure you're arguing with anybody here or anybody on that. That's a straw man.
Well, what I would
lots of protections against vilification.
What I would prefer, I think, is what Brandis originally suggested. He suggested a change to the wording rather than getting rid of that clause altogether.
Because the bar at the moment is set low in a lot of people's views. They think offend and insult is too easy, that's part of our free speech in an open democracy. So you'd be more comfortable, would you, Miriam, where you just kept, say, humiliate and intimidate in the act and you got rid of offend and insult? Jess, where do you stand on this one?
I don't think we have a problem with free speech in Australia. That's how I feel. I don't think speech has ever been freer, and we're all the recipient of people's feedback daily, good or bad. So I don't see it under threat. I think the protections in place probably are fine. I think we should have a debate about it, because better out than in. And if we have this conversation again about, what are the lines of race in this country, and the really interesting point that Warren Mundine made was that, that there's just a misunderstanding of what it means to be Aboriginal. It's not about the colour of the skin. It is almost akin to sort of different countries' lineage. It's like Australia was a nation of many nations before it was settled, and Aboriginal people don't identify just as Aboriginal. They are from a particular tribe, and so it's like saying a Jewish person, you have that cultural heritage, so you're entitled to that cultural heritage no matter what the colour of your skin. So I think these are all interesting issues.
When you visit that world, you're amazed by the depth of its complexity, and the Aboriginal Australia is a white construction, and so that's absolutely true.
All right. Well, we're going to move on now.